That's my phone playing. Okay. I was trying to figure out where my own video was playing in the background. What is up, fellas? Welcome to another episode of Rewriting History with me, the Goob. I'm quite nervous and excited for this episode, honestly, because I think I have made a very, very major breakthrough in the understanding of Peru. Last week, I was talking about Sacsayhuaman and whether or not it was geopolymer, and I presented a whole lot of information and evidence that it was. And despite multiple scientific tests seemingly confirming it and all of the supporting evidence, I was still unwilling to declare Sacsayhuaman being geopolymer as fact. I was still uncertain whether it was natural stone or geopolymer. This week, however, I believe I have absolute, undeniable evidence that geopolymer was being used in Peru. If you guys remember that vitrified cave that I was showing you last week, the one that's totally inexplicable through any mainstream methods, heat really can't explain it. You'd have to have an extremely high heat source applied for a very brief time period. Well, I think I know how that cave was made, and I think it's the key to understanding everything else in Peru. So I'm going to be presenting that, and along with that, I'm going to be trying to present a theory, again, that goes along with this new information to try and explain things. The theory is still in development. The evidence of the cave is rock solid. It's undeniable. The theory is still in development. I've also been cramming like it's the night before a final, and I haven't shown up to the class since picking up the syllabus, and I've been doing that every night of the week since last week's episode. So it's a massive amount of information. Trying to present it all is going to be a struggle. So I'm encouraging you guys to take notes and write down questions, right? So at the end of this, I'll open up the phone lines for things that I've skipped or missed or didn't explain fully. Ask your questions at the end. I should be able to answer them. With that, I guess let's go ahead and get into this, right? So I wanted to try and figure out if Sacsayhuaman was geopolymer. That was the goal of my research. So I thought I'd start by looking at pre-Inca civilizations. Do we see a logical progression of stonework from pre-Inca civilizations through the Inca? And so I started looking, and I will share with you what I found as best I can. So this is the Wari culture. This is a pre-Inca culture, and here are some of their stoneworks. It's very impressive. It's this huge wall, this huge road. Very, very impressive work. And this is before the Inca. And so you do see a pretty direct and linear progression of stonework going through these pre-Inca cultures up through the Inca. But the interesting thing is that the progression that you see is specifically with this style of construction. You do have the, trying to remember all the names of these cultures, right? You have the Chavin culture, which goes back over 3,000 years. And if you go back over 3,000 years, these patterns break down and we start seeing some really weird things, which I'll get into at the end of this episode. But you see the Chavin building with these loose stone walls. And then after the Chavin come the Tiwanaku. Again, you see them building with some loose stone walls. Then you have the Wari after that. And the Wari have gotten pretty good at building with these loose stone walls. If you see, this is quite impressive. I mean, this is quite the structure that they're building. You can't really tell how tall this is, but it's relatively tall as well. It's a very impressive road and wall. But you also have anomalies. This is at that same site. This is the Wari. This is that same wall we're looking at. And now we have massive, perfectly fit megalithic blocks. The Wari didn't really do anything else in this megalithic style. You just have these blocks kind of popping up out of nowhere. at this wall. Now, some archaeologists suggest that this is actually later Inca work. Doesn't make a ton of sense to me because these walls seem kind of like the focal point of, the rest of the wall. Seems like this would have been here first. That's just my opinion. But it's rather anomalous in the Wari time period. You also have these aqueducts. These are actually from the Chavin culture before the Wari. But again, you see like loose, smaller, even smaller, much smaller than what we were just looking at with the Wari. You see loose stone walls from the Chavin culture. But then they have these aqueducts here. Perfectly round holes going through all of these blocks. These aqueducts were totally destroyed when found, so we have no idea where these were originally located or how they functioned exactly. But we find these aqueducts around, and this is not ancient Chavin construction. This is like modern stone stacking, but you do have loose stone walls that are not as impressive as this in this same location as you have these aqueducts. Then we get to the Tiwanaku. Let me switch my screens here. Then we have the Tiwanaku. So the Tiwanaku are in between the Wari and the Chavin. And they have small, loose stone walls, but they also have a site called Puma Punku and Tiwanaku. Here's a little map of it. So these are all, relatively in the same site, but they're considered separate individual sites. And we find some very anomalous things here. Not only do you have some, interesting, very clear right angles in the back, very smooth surfaces, but here on this block, we have tiny little holes drilled in this tiny little channel. Here's another block, and you can't make it out all that well, but on this edge, on this little edge, you again have tiny little holes drilled all the way down this edge. You also have another channel up here with more tiny little holes drilled, a perfectly circular hole drilled all the way through here, and another larger channel running down to another circular hole drilled, and the rock is broken. You find things like this all over Tiwanaku, these holes in the rock. None of these buildings were still standing when they were discovered, so trying to say what I'm about to say is a little wishy-washy, but these seem to be wall blocks, not foundation blocks. And so if these are like water channels, they seem to be running up in elevation. They seem to be going vertically as well as horizontally. And they are in the walls, so it's not like on ground level. So if this was for water, it would seem that they had pipes going along with it. Just a closer look at some of those drill holes. There's no noticeable tool marks. They're very tiny little drill holes. More anomalous structures we see here. Very large stones, very, very precise work, very, very tight 90-degree interior angles. Archaeologists themselves have said that the stone tools that we find at Lake Titicaca, at Puma Punku and Tiwanaku, do not explain these extremely precise interior 90-degree angles. That was an out-of-order image. I'll come back to that. More on the holes. That same block I showed you earlier with more drilled holes in that channel. Very, very... How are you carving that in andesite, which is like a 7 on the Mohs scale? These are very hard stones. I don't know how deep that goes back, but can you imagine getting a stone chisel, into those tiny little holes and pounding away and pounding out that material in perfectly 90-degree interior corners inside of that tiny little space? I mean, that's some really impressive chiseling work, considering it's all being done with stone tools. Yes, they had copper, but copper does not cut andesite. Again, interesting features here. You find these all over as well. So you can see there's 2 holes on the backside here. This has been broken off, but there would have been 2 holes here. So you have a channel running through here and running through these holes. It looks like there was another little C shape here. What these are for, I have no idea. Was this potentially some way of binding the blocks together? Did they have metal rings going through here or something? It's possible. Also, look over here. So you'll see this on a lot of stones. It's not just at Tiwanaku and Puma Punku, but you can see the original surface of this stone was extremely flat. It was extremely smooth. And then this rough surface is weathering or damaged. This is not how it originally looked. It was this very, very smooth surface that you got here. More strange holes and strange features. Another one of those little, loops was that, again, you can almost imagine you have like 4 blocks here. You got a quarter circle here. So if you have like 4 blocks with a quarter circle, maybe they're putting, a metal ring in there or something. And I'm saying a metal ring because they did have metal. Here's those T-clamps that you find all around the world at other megalithic sites. They have them here at Tiwanaku and Puma Punku as well. There were traces of metal found in them. Interestingly, the metal had nickel in it, and there's no local sources of nickel. The famous H blocks, which you'll find this from alternate people. You'll find this from mainstream people. You find the claim constantly that these blocks fit together like Lego pieces. This is not true. The blocks do not fit together like Lego pieces. You can see on the back of this block, right, you have a slot that might even seem like it slots into one of these slots. These are tapered. They're not 90-degree angles. These are 90-degree angles. You can also see that this is just wider. It's larger than this. The idea that these blocks slot together like Legos is just not true. I don't know why it's so prevalent, but it's not true. More very interesting features. You got one of those holes going through here. Again, was that for like binding this to something? You got a little cutout over there and weird little cutouts over here. Just strange features. There was also an attempt to reassemble this site. So archaeologists made 3D printed versions of all of these blocks, and then they built it together and went, this is how it looked. I don't think they have any idea how it looked. A lot of this hasn't been excavated. A lot of this is still buried. These are the sandstone foundations of Tiwanaku. They're perfectly level and perfectly flat. Brian Forrester has a lot of very good footage showing this, and they're also massive. These aren't massive, but the largest sandstone foundation blocks are 180 tons. More strange blocks with aqueducts, water channels, strange, striations on this block, more strange striations. And this, everything you're seeing here, except for these large upright stones, is all modern. This is all modern construction and modern stone. All of this is modern construction and modern stone. The only thing that's original are these pillars, these stairs, and these pillars as well. So here you can see what Tiwanaku used to look like when it was first found, and here you can see what's been done to it. So trying to make sense of this, any of this, gets very difficult, because this is not really all that unique to Tiwanaku. I mean, the modern construction somewhat is, but this place was used as a quarry by the Incas. It was used as a quarry by other groups. It was used as a quarry by the Spanish. People have come and blown this stuff up with dynamite. Like, there's much of it is still left unexcavated. So trying to make sense of it is difficult. But let's take a close look at this image here. So we have the original pillars. They have some interesting marks on them. Every single one has this line. It's slightly sticking out in the front by, like 4 inches, going all the way up each one of these pillars. And then you can see some other strange indentations into the side. But look at these blocks down here. These are the original blocks the wall's been destroyed and it's buried here, you can see. But look how perfect and large and square those blocks look. And then take a look at the modern reconstruction. These are modern cut blocks. These are not blocks that were found on the site and put back into place. These were actually cut in modern times and moved here. And they're not nearly as impressive as the older construction, in my opinion. Here's one of the massive gates that weighs 130 tons. Another, look at that gate. Another massive gate. Some of the original stairs. Okay. So some of you guys have probably heard that the Davidovits group has tested the blocks at Puma, Punku, and Tiwanaku, and they've determined that these blocks are geopolymer. The sandstone and the H blocks, the andesite H blocks. Links should be in the description for those studies if you want them. It's actually 2 different recipes for geopolymer. So the andesite blocks, they took samples of them and they found organic materials and compounds in the andesite blocks. This was not the only evidence for them being geopolymer, though. They also looked at them under a microscope and they are finding physical structures in the andesite that doesn't look like traditional andesite. It looks more amorphous than it should, like a binder, like a geopolymer binder. On top of this, archaeologists excavated a site called Imawe. In fact, let me see if I have, let me try and pull up a specific map here. If I've got it, I should have that map in this. Here we go. Okay. So Imawe is a port at Puma, Punku, Tiwanaku, whatever you want to call it here, Lake Titicaca, okay? And archaeologists excavated Imawe, and in the stratigraphic layers, they found a layer of volcanic dust. The archaeologists looked at this, and their conclusion was that this was evidence that Imawe is where those H blocks were actually formed. So they believe that the H blocks were quarried from Cerro-Capia. It's not the quarry hasn't actually been identified for the H blocks. There have been multiple quarries suggested for the H blocks, and there's no real evidence of any of these quarries that they were actually quarries. There's not like pounding stones found there. There's not other signs. It's just them identifying spots that potentially could have been used as quarries and going, we think this might be it. So Cerro-Capia on this volcano is where they think the H blocks might have come from, brought across the lake to Iwawe, and then they were shaped at Iwawe and then brought to Puma, Punku, Tiwanaku. The problem with this is that when you shape stone blocks, you're not just crushing the blocks down to powder. That would be the absolute least efficient way to shape your blocks, is to destroy all of the material down to a powder. You're trying to chip off the blocks in chunks and flakes as much as you possibly can because it's far more efficient to do it that way. Well, there's no chunks and flakes found here. It's just the volcanic dust. And they also concluded that the volcanic dust shouldn't be there in those volumes unless it was brought there. So their conclusion, because it doesn't make sense to bring dust there, was that the dust was a production of the stoneworking. But there are pounding stones there, but there's no stone flakes there. There's no chips there. So the Davidovits suggests that they actually brought the sand from Canamarca to Iwawe, and then they formed it into geopolymer and brought it to Puma, Punku, Tiwanaku. Calamarca is where they suggest the sandstone came from, except that the sandstone has different chemical makeup. I thought I was showing the map there, but sorry. So Calamarca is where the sandstone allegedly came from. The chemical makeup of the sandstone does not match Calamarca, nor does it match any local sources, though. It has elevated sodium in it, sodium, which they believe came from natron. So they're making natron-based geopolymer with the sandstone, and they're using a different recipe for the H blocks. Now, this is all largely rejected by the mainstream. But like I said, I think I found the key with that cave. So if you go down into my description, there is and actually let me try and pull up the research myself. I'll see if I even can view my own video. My channel doesn't always let me view my own video. And it's letting me this time. Okay. Sorry, as I should have had this link up already, but Graham Hancock. So it's this Graham Hancock study. All right, let me pull it up on the screen for you, fellas. Evidence of vitrified stonework in the Inca vestiges of Peru. So he's got all kinds of things that he's showing here. The glassy surfaces all over. Interesting glassy surfaces on that. I'll come back to that. But what I'm interested in is this cave. The cave that I showed last week, where every single surface of it is covered in this vitrified surface. And under a microscope, you can see that the vitrified surface is just very surface layer. It doesn't go all the way into the stone. It's just very much on the top. So here's the composition of the surface layer. They did spectral analysis, and you can see it's got a ton of silicon in it and pretty high aluminum content with some calcium, magnesium, oxygen, carbon, right? But it's mostly silicon and aluminum. Well, I have been intensely studying geopolymers lately. By the way, geopolymers are horribly, horribly misunderstood. They are not concrete. They are legitimately different. It is actual artificial stone. Most of the information you see people spouting about geopolymers is bullshit. It is a new science that we are still working on developing today. Not only are large laboratories with cutting edge technology trying to figure this out, but like a lot of technology, a lot of dudes just in their backyard figuring this stuff out. That's where this technology is right now. That's the status of geopolymers. So it's still very much something we're figuring out and developing. But geopolymer binders are made with aluminum and silicon. You create this aluminosilicate geopolymer binder, and that is how you create fake rocks. All you need is that aluminum silicate geopolymer binder and then rock dust. You mix the rock dust and you mix that aluminosilicate geopolymer binder and you get a fake rock. So what is going on here? A little bit, let me go back to this real quick, because as it's saying, this is the surface layer, right? Underneath, does he have... Okay, it doesn't show the graph for it. But if you read the article, it tells you that the stone underneath does not match that surface layer at all. The stone underneath is normal stone. It's not just silicon and aluminum. So what happened here is they took the geopolymer binder that they were using to make geopolymers and they painted it onto this cave. So what the exact recipe for this geopolymer binder is needs to be figured out. How were they had water glass, it would seem. How were they mixing the aluminum into that water glass? I genuinely don't know. But they clearly had geopolymer binder here, and that opens up the door for God. I'm struggling, fellas. I'm struggling. I overloaded my entire brain with massive amounts of information, and I'm struggling to present this in a good way. But there is absolute proof of geopolymer binder being applied to a surface near Sacsayhuaman. This cave is within eyesight of Sacsayhuaman. So you have geopolymer being used at Lake Titicaca from the Tiwanaku 2,000 years ago. The Tiwanaku were from 2,000 years ago to 1,000 years ago. The Inca were 500 years ago. So there's a 500-year gap in there. But you have geopolymer at Titicaca with the sandstone and with the andesite. And then at the cave of near Sacsayhuaman, you have geopolymer binder being applied. And then you have Sacsayhuaman, which is long suspected to be geopolymer. The issue with that are the veins. Okay, but the veins are made out of silica. My inkling initially, for whatever reason, was that we were not looking at just straight limestone concrete at Sacsayhuaman. What we were looking at was limestone concrete with a geopolymer binder added to it. Now, that's totally unnecessary. It doesn't make much sense to add a geopolymer binder to what's already concrete, but that was stuck in my head for some reason. And then now we have proof that they had geopolymer binder that they could have been adding to that limestone concrete, and that could potentially explain those veins. Those veins are made out of silica. The geopolymer binder is made out of silica. So if we think that Sacsayhuaman could be geopolymer, and we see stones, let's see if I can get the right screen up here for you, the right pictures. And we see stones. Let me find a good picture for you here. Sorry, as I flip through. Where's the picture I'm looking for? Here we go. So, well, that's not really the picture. All right. We see stones in Cusco made out of granite that show the exact same properties as the Sacsayhuaman stones. There's the nubs, there's the pillowy surface, there's the beveled edge, and then there's the ridges, right? Look at these edges where these stones were coming together. That is an elevated ridge right at that edge, which really doesn't make a whole lot of sense through traditional methods, nor do the pillowy surfaces, nor do, as I just showed a second ago, right? Here you have again what I was showing you at Tiwanaku. I am showing you guys the pictures, right? Good. All right, let me make it bigger for you. What I was just showing you at Tiwanaku, you have those very smooth surfaces on the stone, and those smooth surfaces have been broken off or deteriorated off, and you're left with this rough surface. People have tried to say that these are tool marks before. I don't think they are, and this especially puts a damper on that. What is going on here? Why do you have such a smooth surface on the front here, much like you would see with a geopolymer pressed up against a mold, and then this rough surface around it? If there's a lot of destruction from the Spanish, I mean, could the Spanish, imagine walking into a city and you not only see the most spectacular stonework you've ever seen, but it's also just shining like gold. You know, it's just, the whole thing is shiny and ridiculously beautiful. Would you potentially try and knock off that shininess and make it dull? It wouldn't actually take a lot of effort to do that. It would take a few minutes per stone. I don't know, but what is an explanation for this without geopolymer? And to strengthen this geopolymer argument with Tiwanaku and the connection to Tiwanaku, I haven't really begun building my theory yet, but there's a specific image here. I apologize again for the rapid flickering through. Okay, so this is a stone found at Tiwanaku. It's sandstone. You see normal sandstone back here. You see normal sandstone on this surface, but then on the front and right here, running back a little bit, you see again a vitrified glassy sandstone. I am very willing to bet that if you tested this surface as well, it would match the surface in the cave. It would be that aluminum silicate geopolymer binder. That aluminum silicate geopolymer binder is now located at Sacsayhuaman and at Tiwanaku, Lake Titicaca. Am I? Let me take a quick break, take a couple breaths, read through the chat. Yeah, I do need to get a haircut. Okay. Thank you, Weird Old World. I appreciate that. It is it's difficult trying to the descriptions of all of these sites isn't always great. So yeah, I appreciate the bit of information. But it is all Wari Road, right? So it's nearby. It is all Wari Road. I feel like the point I was making is still standing. Yes, and there are millions of terraces. So like I said, you do see this progression in stonework. In the loose, dry stonework, you do see a progression, and the Inca have absolutely mastered it. You have millions of terraces in Peru. That's insane. Millions of terraces. You have hundreds of miles of roads with retaining walls running along them. You have all of their houses and buildings. They did become absolute masters at that dry, double-walled, loose-fitting stonework. And in fact, out of the thousands of images I've looked at and the probably hundreds of hours of footage that I've seen, I can't recall a single destroyed Incan terrace. Surely some exist. I truly am convinced some exist. But you look at the level of destruction of all of these Incan megaliths, and then you look at the terraces. I don't know of any destroyed terraces whatsoever. So it seems that the destruction was very focused. Obviously, much of this destruction is modern, and in fact, I never did show you the image I kept talking about from last week and the week before with the block leaning against these Sacsayhuaman walls. I think it was an AVIF file, and so it doesn't open with my image displayer. Where is the image I'm looking for? Where the hell's the image I'm looking for? There it is. Okay, so here's another example of one of those Hanan Pancha style. And I can't truly tell if this construction is running all the way underneath there, but I'm assuming it is. And I'm assuming this was somehow blown up and flipped on top of that. But even if this one isn't, you can find that image from the Sacsayhuaman walls. So a lot of this destruction is recent, but then you also have all of the Incan repair work. A lot of this destruction is ancient. And it doesn't apply to the Inca style construction of the loose fitting stone. And if you look at the Inca Empire had a steady rise. They rose pretty explosively, but they were at their peak right before the Spanish arose. Right before the Spanish got there, they were at their peak. So you're looking at all the destruction of the megaliths and all of the Incan repairs of the megaliths, and they're clearly repairs because the repairs are of much lower quality. And it is hard to make sense of if the Inca earlier in their time were able to make these grand megalithic structures, and then by every other metric and measurement, they are improving and increasing and growing and getting greater in power and ability, but then not able to repair those previous structures. It doesn't add up. Doesn't add up. Well, there are white people in this area. I'm going to be talking about. I don't know. I'm also going to be talking about the trydactyls, which I know is out there, but. Thank you. Yes, I did know it was Rumicolca. Rumicola. Again, it gets even more difficult because there's different spellings for this stuff. I've seen it written as one word, Rumicolca. I wouldn't be surprised if Rumicola. Oh, okay, you corrected it. Whatever. But there are different spellings for these names as well. Inca, sometimes with a K, sometimes with a C. So yeah, we've got geopolymer. We've got geopolymer at Lake Titicaca and Tiwanaku. We've got geopolymer at Sacsayhuaman. And we know that the geopolymer binder made it to Sacsayhuaman into the cave. it seems fairly reasonable to think that the geopolymer binder was used in the construction of Sacsayhuaman and that those are actually geopolymer blocks. And if we assume that, it also seems very reasonable to assume that all of those granite blocks in Cusco are geopolymer. And I just showed you some interesting features with them, like the shiny surfaces. But there's an issue, right? You can't make geopolymer granite. How can you make geopolymer granite? Well, I've got a little video here from Brian Forrester, who is not, by the way, Brian Forrester does not believe in geopolymer. So I'm sharing video evidence from a guy who doesn't even believe in geopolymer. Yes, this is, all right. So this is just another example.
Stone looks like. The quarry is 45.
Sorry, this is another example.
And then we have this curious patch. This is what the raw basalt stone looks like. The quarry.
Right, so just another smooth patch on the rough stone, but the smooth patch is obviously what was there originally, because you can see that the other stone has been removed from around it. But let's listen to what Brian Forrester says here about the granite blocks in Cusco.
The fascinating thing is that most of the green stone here is incredibly.
I don't mean to have this on 2x speed. Let me put that back to normal.
Homogeneous. Fascinating thing is that most of the green stone here is incredibly homogeneous, very unlike the stone when we see it in the quarry itself. And
so did you guys hear that? Right? So it's impossible to make geopolymer granite because of the grain size. But as Brian is pointing out here, the granite that we're looking at is unnaturally homogeneous in comparison to the quarry. Kind of like what you might see with geopolymer. There's also Ollantaytambo, probably said that wrong, excuse me. But Ollantaytambo has some of the largest megaliths in Peru, and they are on top of a very tall mountain. And the explanation from mainstream for how the Peruvians moved all of their stone blocks, all of them, was just by dragging them. They didn't use rollers. They didn't use anything. They didn't use sleds. They used absolutely nothing. They just put ropes on them and they dragged them with men. They did some calculations. They figured out how much it would take to move a 1-ton block using these methods. And they calculated that it would take, I think it was 15 people. And then they scaled this linearly to go, okay, for a 150-ton block, you would just multiply 15 times 150. The problem with this is that these things don't scale linearly. You can go test this in your backyard. Go get something that's 1 pound and push it across your grass. It'll like barely even fold the grass over. It'll be very easy. Get something that's 10 pound. Now you're definitely smushing that grass down, but you can push it across the yard. Now get something that's 100 pound. You're going to be eating into that dirt now. It's going to be, actually digging into the ground. The heavier you get, there's the law of diminishing returns, right? So their calculations for a 150-ton block, I think it was 3,500 people. So their suggestion is that they got 3,500 people in a line on a mountain with some rope, and they just walked that bitch up the mountain. Now, 3,500 people does not explain moving 150 tons. As I just said, the diminishing returns, right? I don't know how many people it would actually take, but it would be more than what they're proposing, which is already a ridiculous number of people. The Inca were incredibly good at managing their workforce, but that still seems like a bit of a stretch to me. Just marching these massive stone blocks up mountains like that. So Ollantaytambo, they have these giant granite stones as well. I think I had some pictures actually of Ollantaytambo. My images are not as well organized as I would like them to be as I rapidly flick through, right? So Ollantaytambo, there's 2 different types of granite there. The blocks here are like 150 tons, upwards of that. But these blocks are rhyolite, right? Yeah, I think that's the right stone type, which basically is just granite of a particularly fine grain. So with the Ollantaytambo blocks, you don't have the issue of the grains with it as well. You only need to break down these rocks and then mix them with the geopolymer. This, by the way, is one of the alleged pounding stones that was being used. Can you imagine picking that up and bashing stones with it all day? That is a massive, massive pounding stone. Here are some of those slabs. This one is 180 tons. These were brought from miles away, but as I was saying, the quarry, none of the local sandstone actually matches the chemical analysis of this. So either they were being brought from non-local sources, and by local, I'm still referring to 50 miles away, or they are geopolymer, the elevated sodium being natron. Yeah. That's totally possible. That was, Weird Old World, you offered to provide potentially more information since you are in Peru. And if you are willing and if you're able to, I know you're not in Cusco, but if you would be able to take a closer look at the rocks in the streets of Peru, maybe a bottle of water, get them wet and get some close-up looks at like the grain structures, that would actually be very, very useful, and I think would provide a lot of information for this theory because, yeah, it's just hard to get good information out here. Oh, I wasn't showing you images. Yeah, I'm showing you the wrong screen. My bad, fellas. My bad, fellas. Here's the giant stone slabs. Those are the giant sandstone slabs. There's the giant pounding stone. Ridiculous. And then there's, Ollantaytambo, the blocks that are made out of rhyolite, a very fine-grained granite. So could all of these, that would be awesome. And especially if any of them are wet, because that allows you to see, the grain structure a bit better. But yeah, I would love to see those close-up pics. I'm not a geologist either, but I would be curious to see what the grain structure looks like. Because if you do have these giant grains in this, natural-looking grain matrix, the idea of these being geopolymer does become a lot less likely. But I think I have presented absolute evidence that they had geopolymer. I don't see how else you can interpret that cave. It is in an aluminum silicate binder that's been painted onto the cave. If they're painting the aluminum silicate binder onto the cave, all they need to do is mix that binder with rock dust. They could literally mix it with anything. As Marcel points out in his book, if you mix the binder with spaghetti sauce, you end up with a spaghetti sauce rock, right? It's the binder that's actually making the rock. So they have the binder. They have the geopolymer. All they have to do is make it into a rock. And I believe they were. So now we have to actually figure out, all right, which examples of this are geopolymer and which are not. I think I'm just going to go ahead and open up the phone lines now because there is so much to my theory that I want to present to you guys. But I have been cramming information every single night, ridiculous amounts of information. And it's overwhelmed me a bit and my brain's a bit of a mess right now. So I think feel free to call in and ask questions. I will be able to answer your questions. I will be able to interact in a conversational manner. It's just trying to organize it all into a presentation mentally. I'm really struggling. I do want to get, though, into, as I mentioned earlier, when you go back 3,000 years or even further, these patterns that I was establishing, they get a lot more confusing. They get much stranger. We start to see some very strange things. So let me pull up those images again. I seem to have closed my images, so let's see. Where do I want to start here? We'll start with this. Have you guys ever seen? It's not even opening the right. There we go. All right. Have you guys ever seen columnar? Is that the right word? Pillars in Peru. What the hell? Why is my? I'm not sure what's going on. I just shared my window with you, but it didn't share. And now the window that I'm sharing, I can't reshare it because I'm already sharing it. All right, let me close it. Let me reopen it. Let's try this again. All right, can you guys see it this time? There we go. Now it's working. Okay. Have you guys ever seen columnar pillars? Not exactly what I mean. You see, this is a little bit different. It's a little bit different. So this is actually that earliest civilization, the Chavin culture. Okay, and we have two pillars here. We've got two columns. We don't see that anywhere else in Peru. And we also have quite a bit of megaliths, and specifically these large, square, relatively thin or rectangular, right? But this is absolutely megalithic. This is the Chavin culture. This is going back 3,000 years ago. Okay, these are stone bowls, or whatever you want to call them. They were referred to as very large. So I don't know how big these are. I didn't get dimensions, but apparently large. They look very, very well made. I don't know what type of stone they are, but they look very well made, pretty darn precise. And these were found very recently in a tunnel underneath Chavin de Hontar, this 3,000 plus year old site. And the wording by the archaeologists who found it was basically, we don't know how old this is, but we know the oldest parts of this structure that we've dated are 3,000 years old, and this is obviously older. They didn't elaborate a whole lot, but they were going, this is clearly at least 3,000 years old. So very impressive stone cups there. What the hell is going on with my computer right now? Here we get a better view at the style of megalith that these Chavin people were working with, right? It's very regular. It's very rectangular and square. They're relatively thin, but large, very, very clean and regular. What's interesting is that in that same place with the aqueducts, with the holes through them that I showed you earlier, you find an example of like six. It's like six of these blocks have been stacked into a cube, and that's credited to that later culture. But it seems so very out of place. It seems like they borrowed some of these blocks from either this site or some other site and just built them there. And then those aqueducts also seem very out of place. And this was the Chavin people lived here for quite a while. There's multiple levels. And as you can see, like the top levels, this is just loose stone and dirt. It's not nearly as impressive as these lower levels that have been excavated out. I don't know if it's actually all been excavated, but they're lower, older levels. So you see a progression in stonework, in the loose stonework, starting with, the wari and everything. But then if you go back far enough, you find that the stonework gets more impressive the further back you go. So when you start getting past 3,000 years old in the Chavin culture, you start to find very impressive things again. You also find very interesting things in Peru, like elongated skulls. There are, and in fact, that Ollantaytambo picture where I have the quarry in the background. At that quarry, Weird Old World, I shared this video with him right before the stream. There's a video of Brian Forrester walking into a tomb at that quarry, and there's skeletons sitting right there in that tomb. Some of them have elongated skulls. So if you visit Peru and you visit Ollantaytambo, you can actually go in person and look at some of these elongated skulls right there if you can find them. And there's tombs all over Peru. They're just out in the open. Weird Old World also showed a video of just bones out in the open, not even in a tomb. It's not a super archaeologically active place. Most of the archaeology that happened in Peru happened pre-archaeology. It happened, when guys were still running around with dynamite, blowing shit up, going, look at what I found. It wasn't this meticulous scientific endeavor. So much of our understanding of Peru, it honestly almost comes from tourists going and looking at this stuff, because it's not that archaeologically developed. This is the tunnel. This is the tunnel that they found it. This is tall enough. I don't know the exact dimensions, but they said you could comfortably walk through here. So these are fairly large blocks being used underground in this tunnel. You can see the lentil is even larger. If a man can walk through there comfortably, those are pretty big blocks there. Again, I know it's ridiculous. This is granite. It couldn't possibly be geopolymer, right? Maybe it could be. Very, very regular stonework from these Chavin people over 3,000 years ago. You also have in Peru, not only do you have elongated skulls, but you have the trydactyl mummies. Now, I'm sure many of you think the trydactyl mummies are ridiculous and they're an obvious hoax and an obvious fake. But there's two different things going on. So there is an obvious hoax and there is an obvious fake. There were mummies that were made out of chicken bones and llama bones. Those are fake. Those are not the Nazca mummies. There are Nazca mummies that are held by the Peruvian authorities. Okay, there's a fight right now over trying to bring the Nazca mummies to America for study, and I kind of hope that they don't. Peru doesn't have the scientific capabilities of studying these mummies properly, but if they go to America, I very, very much suspect that they'll be destroyed and disappear, and that we'll never get to the bottom of it because there's patterns of that happening. But like I said, there are the hoax mummies. Those are hoaxes. And then there are the real mummies that are actually held by Peruvian authorities, and they're very, very mysterious. Maybe they are also a hoax. Maybe they are also fake, but they are real enough that many scientists are taking them very seriously. There are, I think it's 18 scientists that have signed their reputation and their names to the legitimacy of these mummies. There are people that are very, very seriously, looking at these things. They've done x-rays, they've done CT scans, they haven't done any destructive testing, but these are real humanoid mummies with 3 fingers and 3 toes. They are real. One of them has metallic implants in its chest. Another one has eggs. It gets very, very strange, right? Sounds pretty outlandish. But you also look at the elongated skulls that are found in Peru. There are certain skulls that have a significantly higher weight and volume to them. This is also dismissed. And if you want to dismiss the volume, okay, fine. But how do you dismiss the weight? Why do they weigh 60% more than a normal human skull unless they actually are larger and with a larger volume? You also have interesting things going on with the sutures. You have a missing sagittal suture, which can disappear with time in normal humans. But you also have additional sutures. There are elongated skulls that have sutures running vertically along the forehead. That is not a human suture. So you have these elongated skulls that are very anomalous, both in suture, in size, in weight, in shape. There's also infants that are already having elongated skulls. If this is happening post-birth, how are there infants with already elongated skulls? Brian Forrester sent these skulls for DNA testing. Initially, the skulls came back as unknown, as unrecognized, as not human. Well, if we're looking at these trydactyls, and these trydactyls they've done DNA testing on as well, it's been inconclusive. There seems to be different versions of the trydactyls. Okay, so essentially what I'm getting at is, could there have been some type of hybridization going on here? Because the skulls, they had some portion of unknown DNA, and then they also had Caucasian DNA from the Caucasus Mountains. Some of these skulls have red hair. So there are white people in Peru. The Paracas people of Peru might not have all been white, but they had white people. And then you have normal skulls, which clearly are bound. So you have people that are trying to replicate these elongated skulls. You have the trydactyl mummies. They have pretty elongated skulls themselves with very large eyes. And we have people that are displaying a level of technology that's pretty anomalous. You have two different recipes of geopolymer at Tiwanaku, and then a third recipe that's used as a binder painted onto the cave. You also have the myths of the Inca people themselves. You've probably heard that the Inca will tell you themselves that they did not construct these things, that it was white people with beards long ago. Well, that's mostly untrue. They actually don't say that about their megalithic sites, except for Tiwanaku and Puma Punku. At that site specifically, that is their myth. Their myth is that Viracocha, their bearded, white-skinned god, which is, by the way, the exact same god that is worshipped by every single culture of South America, except for maybe the Olmecs. We just don't know much about them. But every single culture across all time periods and all geographical locations worshipped the exact same feathered serpent, bearded white man god. He had different names, Amaru, Viracocha, Quetzalcoatl, but it was the same god. So his birthplace, according to the Inca, was Lake Titicaca. Viracocha was birthed at Lake Titicaca, and then Viracocha constructed Tiwanaku and Puma Punku. So you have abnormal displays of technology. You have abnormal genetic evidence with Caucasians and potentially some unknown element. You have abnormal skulls. Not only are they elongated, they're larger, they're heavier, and they are either missing sutures or having additional sutures. Amongst the trydactyls themselves, you have different forms of the trydactyls. The trydactyls don't all look uniform. So it seems like there's some really strange and interesting genetic manipulation going on here, hybridization going on here. There's also in my description a link to some trydactyl depictions from the Inca and from the Nazca. They depicted these three-fingered beings in their art. They have very large eyes. They've got 3 fingers. They've got 3 toes. I don't know, fellas. Yes. And there's some of the mummies that Brian Forrester was studying came from private collections. There's an elongated skull and mummy on display. I think it's the courthouse or the town hall of Cusco. So these elongated skulls, they're out there. They're on display in the wild. They're on display in museums. They're on display in municipal buildings, and they are in private collections as well. I did not, by the way, fellas, please call in with your questions. I feel like I've presented a lot of very interesting things. Let's have a conversation about it. I definitely have not presented or even really begun to present my theory as to everything that we're seeing in Peru. It's still a work in progress. I need to do a lot more work on it. But I am hoping that this revelation of the cave being geopolymer binder is going to provide a key that will allow us to better understand these things. They had the technology for geopolymer. It's undeniable now. I don't know about you guys, but that cave to me is absolutely undeniable. And you combine that with the Tiwanaku evidence, I think it makes the Tiwanaku evidence undeniable. You see the same paint being applied to a stone at Tiwanaku. So, yeah. Well, the main thing is that geopolymer has been proven and validated now. We have hard evidence of geopolymer in Peru. So the question is, what is geopolymer? We need to figure that out. The other part of my theory, which is pretty loose still, is that the megaliths that we see are not Incan. And I know this is nothing new. But I don't think they're 12,000 years old. Like I was saying, you go back to about 3,000 years ago with the Chavin culture. And much like in other parts of the world, the further you go back, actually, the more impressive they get. So you have this very impressive megalithic work, those stone bowls or vases or whatever you want to call them. That megalithic work underground, right? By the way, the scientists determined that there were layers even below that layer that they haven't even attempted to explore yet. So they haven't even gotten to the oldest layers of Chavin de Hontar yet. But as you go down through the layers of Chavin de Hontar, they get more impressive the further back you go. The further back in time you go, the more impressive they get. So what I'm sort of suggesting here is that there was a group, whether they be alien or white people or whatever, and they were doing this megalithic construction. They are likely responsible for the megaliths we see in Peru that are just scattered all about, that don't have anything else around them. It's pretty often you'll find like some random megalith in the jungles of Peru, and then around it you'll find these small Peruvian Inca grave sites. So they've stacked little stones together to make a tiny little grave just big enough to fit a fetal position body inside of it. And that's like, and there's nothing else around it. You find a megalith, you find some Inca graves, and then there's nothing else there. So it's very strange where these megaliths are found and how they're found and everything. And then the fact that they're damaged and repaired by the Inca, but in such lower quality. I don't think they're Incan. I don't think they're 12,000 years old either. I think they're going back. I'm still working on dialing in the time, but over 3,000 years. They're over 3,000 years old. And then you have the Chavin likely wiping these people out and moving into Chavin de Hontar, and you see them living there. And as the infrastructure crumbles, as the resources run out, you see a gradually decreasing quality. So I'm supposing that the Chavin took over this more advanced civilization, and then they were able to some degree, like maintain and replicate some of what they're seeing, but gradually lose that ability as, things just crumble over time. And then you see a return to this exclusively loose-fitting stone style. And then with the Inca, you again see a potential return to geopolymer. So it's actually two different ideas that I've got. One is that the Inca rediscovered the ability to make geopolymer at Tiwanaku, at Lake Titicaca, and then they were. I don't think that's necessarily the most likely thing because, again, you don't see the repairs. The Incan repairs to these megaliths, if that is the case, you would think they'd be able to repair them, and they don't seem to be able to repair them. So I don't think they did find it at Lake Titicaca and bring it back. I think it was all previous, but that's what I'm attempting to do. And it's still rough. It's still a work in progress. Seriously, no one, call in, you bastards. I want to have a conversation about this because the amount of studying and research I've done, absolutely insane. I could have a very well informed and educated conversation on this, but I am absolutely stumbling as far as trying to present it. Definitely stumbling. But yeah, there's a lot of very interesting things that I didn't even highlight and show you guys because it's just too much. Let's see if I can find some of these other interesting things in the pictures. I don't know. And I mean, this is Inca, right? So I also just want to highlight that how impressive the Inca were. Even if you take all of the megalithic constructions away from the Inca, millions of terraces, hundreds of miles of roads, all of these retaining walls, like the Inca were insanely impressive what they did. And whether the megalithic construction was partially Inca or not, they are still just insanely impressive. This is clearly shaped rock, right? But then you have these very weird gashes and slashes in it. And if you look close up on these gashes and slashes, it looks like there's a different material on the surface from below. It looks like the surface below is rough tool marks, kind of like rough chiseling. And then you have this different surface on the top that is perfectly smoothed. Could even the Hanan Pancha style work be geopolymer? I know that's really getting out there, right? But could they have formed this roughly with, traditional methods, and then to achieve that perfectly smooth surface, they actually geopolymer over it? I mean, this does look rather interesting, right? That close-up sure looks like a different material put on top, a rough chiseled surface underneath. I don't know. Here's another interesting one. Very large aggregate there, but smoothed perfectly. I have no idea where this is even from. Okay, here's a picture. Here's a statue that shows some interesting things. You have, this puma statue. Looks pretty normal for the most part, but then there's some very interesting features. What is going on with this statue? What is happening here? That certainly doesn't look like chisel marks. Is this something that was melted by natron, or what exactly are we looking at here? I honestly don't know, but it's another anomalous thing. Very anomalous little features. Also, a part of my theory, you have around the world these megalithic structures, and with them you have the naval statues. I don't know if that fits in here because we do have this guy, and we've got a couple little examples of naval statues. But honestly, we have similar statues to this where they're not naval statues. It's like holding itself like this. And these look a bit different from the ones we find around the world. So is this part of that global potential civilization that was making megaliths and naval statues? I don't know that it is. Piping and conduit through all of these stones. Piping and conduit through all of these stones. Whoever was here was doing some very advanced stuff. This is Lake Titicaca area, right? Channel through the, it's massive blocks. Somewhere in here, here's an interesting block from Titicaca, right? Look at that. And again, imagine like carving those interior angles in there. I'm not showing you the fucking shit. God damn it. God damn it. I'm too, fellas, I've cooked my brain too much. I've crammed too much information. I'm not going to be able to do much better than I've already done of presenting my theory. I'm going to have to come back to it another week. But I have presented. What do you guys think about that cave? The cave that is painted with geopolymer binder. Like, is that not a major breakthrough? Is there another explanation? I don't know. I can repeat it all. All right. Well, that is nice to know, Slav. Those are kind words. These are original faces to the Lake Titicaca area. They're pretty interesting. They're usually pretty damaged, but again, none of this wall, like this isn't what this originally looked like. This is all a modern reconstruction. Here's those strange blocks at Titicaca that I was showing you. Look at the original. So this was the original construction, right? Look at how tight fitting those blocks are. And then this is the reconstruction in the modern day. I don't know what happened to those original blocks. I don't know where they're at. I don't know what happened. This guy completely destroyed and reassembled this site. It's a huge tragedy. I think he thought he was doing something good. But a lot of this site is also just buried still. It's unexcavated. Brian Forster has some great footage of showing, these unexcavated things. These giant gates, by the way, that weigh 130 tons, they have holes in the bottom of them. Let me find a picture of that. Goodness. Here we go. So they have every single gate has these holes in the bottom of it. I don't know how deep these holes go. I don't know if they potentially run all the way through the rock or if they only go a little bit. I do know that there's one block that's been broken off about where that line is, and you can see the hole continues further inside than that. So they're at least, several inches. What are those holes for? That's on the bottom of the gate. There's another little thing over here. I don't know what those holes would be for. If those holes are for slotting into something, right? If you are lowering that gate down to slot something into those holes, that means you're able to lift a 130-ton gate, hold it steady, and lower it in a slow and controlled fashion, very precisely and directly on top of, whatever that was being slotted into. Every single gate has those holes in them. What are those holes for? I don't know. It does not seem congruent with the Tiwanaku people. Again, I showed you Puma Punku and Tiwanaku. I didn't even show you the other constructions of the Tiwanaku people. They're in no way comparable. They are small scale loose stone walls. Small scale loose stone walls, and then this 180-ton sandstone slabs that are perfectly flat and leveled that are coming from 50 plus miles away, except they're not, because the elevated sodium content that doesn't match any of the local sandstone. Obvious evidence of natron geopolymer. Yeah, it's just. Yes, exactly. If it's geopolymer, it makes a hell of a lot more sense, doesn't it? If it's natural stone, I don't know I don't know how you're explaining that. Like, what is the explanation for that? Why do you have a hole on the bottom of every one of these gates? Unless it's to slot into something. And if it is, how are you explaining them slotting it into something? It would be incredibly difficult, unless, of course, it is geopolymer. Some rather interesting Hanan Pancha style stuff. I don't remember which site this is. I overloaded myself. There's very cool, the art style of the Tiwanaku people is reminiscent of Aztec Mayan, right? Seems to share some similarities. Looks pretty cool. A lot of snakes. That's a somewhat alien looking head, isn't it? So, another thing that I've noticed, he's not holding his navel. And a pattern that I've noticed with the actual naval statues is that their ribs are visible. For whatever, I guess these naval guys were starving because their ribs are always visible. And I don't think I have the image in here, but there actually is one single example of a statue like this where it's holding its navel and the ribs are visible from Peru. There's only one that I was able to find. Yeah, without some kind of prompt from you guys, my brain's cooked at this point. I'm gonna have to revisit this. The circular columns are really, really interesting to me because you don't find this anywhere else. You find these two circular columns at this 3,000 plus year old site. Yeah, and I don't think the connection is there with the stela. Like, I think that people have done a pretty good job of making a connection between the naval statues around the world, and I'm not so convinced that connection is here with these stela. But as for the NAGPRA stuff, I don't think Trump is very aware of it. There's so much going on that trying to get that to blow up and get attention on that is going to be difficult. Trump's doing good things, so like maybe we'll get there too. He's not, from my understanding, he's not even like technically able to replace the secretaries yet, right? There's a 30-day notice that he has to give to Congress before he can replace these secretaries. So I'm not even aware of a notice to replace the Department of Interior secretary, but yeah, not a whole lot's happened as far as I know yet, but a whole lot could happen. Yeah, the naval statues are about the sea and stuff. I mean, if you're finding the statues all over the world and you're trying to suggest that they have a common source, then whoever was making them was traveling the seas, right? So they are related to the sea in that aspect. But the connection that I've seen some people try and make, and it might be a valid connection, is that they're associated with these mysterious megalithic sites that don't really seem to fit into the larger framework like what we see in Peru. Damn it, I accidentally closed my images, but that's okay. But yeah, the main takeaway of this episode was the breakthrough of the geopolymer. It's established. It's a fact. They were using geopolymer. So now we need to figure out who and when. And that's definitely still a work in progress. I'm going to keep trying to work on it and get closer to the answer. But without further testing, it's going to be almost impossible to figure this stuff out. Like, we need amateurs, because archaeologists are not going to do this work. We need amateurs to go to Peru, get in contact with the Peruvian authorities, and get permission to do testing on these sites. People like Graham Hancock have done it. People like Davidovich have done it. They are not archaeologists. They got permission from the Peruvian authorities. Peru is not like America. So talking about NAGPRA, Peru is not like America. The archaeological community in Peru is very different from America. If you go down there and you have a serious plan, if you've identified labs that you want to work with, you've got detailed descriptions of the tests that you want to run, where you want to take the samples, how you're going to take the samples, all of this, like it's going to be a lot of work. It is definitely going to be a lot of legwork for sure. But if you go to the Peruvian authorities and you've done that legwork and you go, hey, I want to study this stuff, will you allow me to? I do believe they will say yes. I do believe that they will say yes, and they will allow you to study this. So the next step in this process is getting amateurs to go to Peru, or people like Weird Old World who are already in Peru, and start taking samples and start studying this stuff, because we know they were using geopolymer. That's a fact now. I think we can reasonably accept the sandstone and the H-stone blocks as facts of geopolymer. I mean, we'd already had evidence from Davidovich. It was evidence that was dismissed, but now with this further evidence of the cave, and then the further evidence, someone should take a sample of, that stone block that is at Lake Titicaca. This one right here, as I pull it up. This block right here, which appears to have been painted with the geopolymer binder, a sample of that should be taken. I'm quite confident that what you will find is that same aluminosilicate binder painted onto this rock as well. So we've got proof of geopolymer being used at Lake Titicaca. We've got proof that it made its way to Sacsayhuaman, that cave. Maybe Weird Old World can provide some information onto the exact location of that cave, but I'm like 99% sure it's within the vicinity, like within sight distance of Sacsayhuaman. We have those anomalous blocks at Sacsayhuaman, which have long been speculated about being geopolymer. And then we have blocks with the exact same anomalous features in granite and basalt and other stones in Cusco. So we need to get to the bottom of it. We need to test these things. I'm done with my presentation, by the way. I wish I had done a better job. I apologize, but I have spent 7 nights of just cramming as much information into my brain as I can, and I'm still trying to process it all. Certain things, I have managed to establish certain patterns to my satisfaction. I don't know if I did a good job of presenting them, but I am quite convinced that the megaliths we're looking at largely are not Incan. The destruction that happened to these megaliths, much of it is recent, much of it is also ancient. You don't see destruction in the Incan style constructions. Where is the destruction to their buildings with the loose fitting stone? Where's the destruction to the terraces and the roads and all of their houses? It doesn't seem to be there. So the destruction happened before the Inca, and then again after the Inca with the Spanish. Thank you. I really do appreciate it. I feel kind of shitty that I can't present it better, but I do feel like I got the cave part out there, and that's the most important part. But yeah, I do feel really good that, like, I feel like I've made a major breakthrough with the cave. I feel like that is a major breakthrough. So I do feel good about that part, and thank you for the kind words. It does make me feel better about the rest of the presentation. That's it, fellas. If no one wants to call in, that's it. I'm going to peace out. Thank you for watching. Thank you for listening. And I'll be back with you again next week. Later, fellas.